Okay, let's talk about the war in Ukraine because by fuck a lot of shit's been talked about this war since it began. Not with the invasion of the country by Russian forces on February the 24th, 2022, but I contend with the Maidan coup that toppled successfully the then democratically elected Ukrainian government led by Viktor Yanukovych in February 2014. So let's get right to the point. Russia is winning the conflict. It is achieving its strategic objectives one by one, albeit at great cost, but it is achieving them in the face of determined resistance by Ukrainian forces. And let's not forget that Russia deployed 190,000 troops to this so called special military operation, named as such by Vladimir Putin. And the Ukrainians, under arms in defence, had 246,000 troops, 900,000 reserves, and another 120,000 civilians, volunteers. So the Russians were heavily outnumbered at the start of this conflict in terms of manpower. But in terms of equipment and artillery and aircraft and missile technology, etc., there is no comparison. And this difference in capability remains the case to this day, despite the huge amount of military aid that's been funneled into the country from the West over the last 4 months. The Russians have taken the southern Ukrainian towns and cities of Kherson, Melitopol, Mariupol, two former contiguous land bridge between Crimea all the way east into Russia proper. It is also, as I speak, on the verge of taking the whole of the Donbass, which is a vast region in the east of the country abutting Russia's western border, which is the size of Belgium and Holland combined. It's done this by a war of manoeuvre and encircling pockets of Ukrainian troops and forging them into cauldrons and letting artillery and missile strikes do the rest. Lots of Ukrainians are surrendering, they're running out of ammunition, and as I say, they are being heavily defeated when they are coming across Russian forces en masse. That's not to say that everything's gone Russia's way. The initial attempt to decapitate the Zelensky government with the attempt to take Hostomel airport 5 kilometers north of Kiev, that failed. Ukrainians were prepared, and there was also, I think, a catastrophic failure at the outset when it comes to Russian intelligence on Ukraine, on the determination and likelihood that the Ukrainians would resist and how much that resistance would impede Russia's advance and military operation. And we do know that the head of the FSB, I think the Fifth Department, and his deputy had been arrested because it's believed that they were feeding Putin false intelligence in this regard. But the Russians have adjusted, and they've adjusted well. I do not think they have any desire to take the whole of Ukraine. Why would they? They know that they could not do that. That's not what Putin's intention is. Ukraine is an independent state, but he does see no option, obviously, but to take control of the Russian speaking, the ethnic Russian parts of the country in the east and in the south, given what had transpired since Maidan with the attempt to oppress Ukraine's ethnic Russian minority in terms of language, in terms of employment, and in terms of status as Ukrainian citizens. And this was done at the behest of ultra nationalists and avowed neo Nazis who have managed to control the political direction of travel of Ukraine since Maidan. The Azov Battalion, the Adar, Centuria, Kiev 1, Dnipro 1, Dnipro 2, C-14, right, etc. There's seemingly 30 such ultra nationalist, neo Nazi militia groups now absorbed into Ukrainian armed forces. And it's simply the case that there is no other state in Europe into which uniformed and armed battalions of neo Nazis have been assimilated into the country's armed forces. And this has been overlooked or downplayed in the West for reasons of geostrategic expediency. The fact that Nazi ideology has enjoyed a renaissance in Western Ukraine in recent years, to the point where the veneration in which Stepan Bandera, a Ukrainian fascist collaborator who was involved in some heinous atrocities during the Second World War, is reached the status of an official religion, state religion in Ukraine. Zelensky is leadership, I think, will be condemned in the court of history in years to come. He has allowed himself and his country to be used as a Western proxy. His country's been turned into a de facto US/NATO dependency in the course of the last 4 months. Western leaders are quite happy for this war to be fought to the last drop of Ukrainian blood. And Ukraine has become a battleground where its prosperity and development and stability and security was always contingent on it being a bridge between Russia and the West. So Zelensky was voted in 2019 on a thumping majority of over 70%, pledging to implement a ceasefire in the Donbass and to implement the protocols contained within Minsk II, among which is the right of the people of the Donbass to have a level of political autonomy within the wider Ukraine context. He was forced to capitulate to the hardliners within the security and military apparatus in this regard. They refused to adhere to this program, and he allowed himself to become captured by their vision of a monist, idealized, pure Ukrainian national identity, which is at odds with the country's pluralist, multi-ethnic, multilingual character. And we see this with the bid to downplay the official status of the Russian language, which Viktor Yanukovych, with the support of the Ukrainian parliament at the time, had sanctioned in recognition of Ukraine's 70% pro-Russian, ethnic Russian, Russian-speaking minority. So this turn that Ukraine has taken has been a disaster for Ukraine. They've lost Crimea, and they're well on the way to losing Donbass, Mariupol, Kherson, and Melitopol, and maybe even also Odessa. I think that wise heads must prevail in the West to understand that from this point onwards, Russia's security or decisions regarding Russia's security will be taken in Moscow and not in Washington or Brussels or Paris. NATO expansion eastward has been a dagger pointed at Moscow's heart, and despite Putin's repeated warning, the most vocal of which was sounded in his now famous Munich security speech 2007, they've gone unheeded because in the West, Russia is seen as a defeated foe or a foe that must be defeated. The extent to which Western ideologues believe the West to be a latter-day Rome and Russia a latter-day Carthage is the extent to which this crisis has unfolded. It's the odious chasing the contemptible, the propaganda that has been presented to us regarding Russia, this uncritical support of Ukraine that has been forced upon us in the course of this conflict, the Eurovision and Zelensky addressing the Grammys by video link along with every parliament and Congress in the Western orbit has been that has been revelatory to behold, and it confirms the wisdom contained in the words of Bertolt Brecht, which are that unhappy is the land in need of heroes, and certainly Zelensky has been presented as a modern day hero that we can all get behind, a kind of comic, Marvel comic super hero, and he, I think, is reveling in this status that he's enjoyed in the West, prancing around Kiev in his khaki. Meanwhile, he's got $1 billion salted away in offshore bank accounts. He's leading a corrupt country, and he's leading a country that's now being destroyed and disfigured by war. And war is an atrocity. Both sides have been committing atrocities, I have no doubt. Every side and every war commits atrocities. That's the nature of war, and that's why we are obligated to ensure that war does not break out and that human affairs are directed by diplomacy and negotiation, not war and conflict. But we live in an age where war has become romanticised. In the UK, it's become normalised, and we are now being conditioned, given the outrageous statement recently made by the new head of the British Armed Forces, General Sir Patrick Sanders, that British troops must now be prepared to meet Russia on the battlefield. Think about that. Think about what that could mean. And when he's addressing the British troops in this regard, he is by extension addressing the British people. We are being conditioned to expect and accept direct military confrontation with Russia. We'll be led by privately educated, rich maniacs. That's a fact. There is no effort at diplomacy. There's no effort to resolve this conflict peacefully. There's every effort being made to escalate it and prolong it. And I worry that the British military and political establishment, knowing that Russia's winning the war on the ground, believe that they have invested too much in helping Ukraine militarily to the tune of hundreds of millions of pounds and tons of weapons, training the troops, etc., that they cannot pull back from the brink, and that we may well, in the weeks and months ahead, be facing the prospect of British boots on the ground in Ukraine, and that would be an unmitigated fucking disaster. An absolute fucking disaster. So, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. It's just a rant. I felt I had to get some things off my chest because of the huge amount of propaganda that I have been treated to and having to contend with. I'm sure you feel the same way. It's never been more important to resist the status quo, and it's never been more important to support those who have an alternative analysis rooted in fact, rooted in history, historical precedents, and rooted in just plain old fucking common sense. Peace out.